Hi, this is part 3 of my analysis of something from nothing, Richard Dawkins and Lawrence Krauss. Uh, we were, if you remember, discussing what they were saying exactly about the subject of creation from nothing, and I said that Lawrence Krauss was actually using the fallacy of equivocation because he was redefining what nothing means to be a physical system that was actually not nothing, and then he would have a theory of how the universe could emerge out of that physical system, and from that he would like use this equivocation fallacy to say that actually the universe came from nothing. Now let's see what they still have, what else they have to say.
Not philosophical or theological one. And and I think the nothing that Aristotle would have had, or St. Thomas Aquinas, or any of the people who first asked why is there something rather than nothing, that nothing would have been an eternal empty void.
Okay, so now he's saying that the nothing that Aristotle thought about was an eternal empty void. Now, this is what Aristotle said about nothing. Nothing is what rocks dream about. So I don't think that Aristotle believed that rocks dream about an empty void. So actually rocks don't dream about anything. That's exactly what nothing is. It's not anything. So this is a factual error by part of Krauss that's saying that Aristotle's nothing was just an empty void. And we saw the fallacy of equivocation, and his other claim that what nothing is a scientific question. Like I said, it's not. What nothing is not even a philosophical question. I think it's just a linguistic question. And nothing, the word nothing means not anything, no single thing. It's an universal negation statement. And what the philosopher is asking is, why is there something rather than nothing? Not why is there this something rather than another something. That's not the question. So let's see what he has to say more.
Namely empty space. But once I argue that empty space can create something, then immediately I'm told that's not nothing. Yeah. And then I show that space itself can be created from nothing, and then I'm told that's not nothing. And then I say, well, and because there are still laws of physics. And then I argue that, in fact, the laws of physics, for the reasons we've discussed, the anthropic principle, there may be many universes, and it's quite likely that even the laws of physics themselves arose by accident when the universe was created. So even the laws aren't there. And I'm told that's not nothing.
You see, that doesn't make any sense. The laws of physics rose themselves by chance when the universe was created. Now, if the universe was created by the laws of physics, according to the laws of physics, then they must have existed at least logically prior to the creation of the universe. So how can they create themselves when the universe, how can they start to exist when the universe is created? That's a self-incoherent statement by Professor Krauss. Certainly, well, I didn't even write that here, but it's it's an incoherent statement. It's a contradiction because it's saying that maybe the laws of physics started to exist after when the universe was created, but in order for the universe to be created, they had to exist. So that certainly doesn't make sense because he's saying that the universe was created according to the laws of physics. So they had to exist at least logically prior to the universe being created. Now let's see what he has to say.
And the definition of theologians, I think, for nothing is that from which only God can create something.
Okay, now that's the point, because once you understand what nothing is, that's not definition of nothing. The definition of nothing according to theologians is this definition. It's the only definition of nothing that exists. And Krauss, and when he was talking about laws of physics, by the way, he was talking about many universes, maybe with different laws. That's again an equivocation fallacy. He's not saying that laws of physics can create themselves. Doesn't make any sense at all. And he was again saying something more, talking about a fallacy of equivocation again. That he presupposed some laws of physics that would then create some laws of physics to some universes. But we will talk about what he actually said about nothing, what his book really says, because I have a comment here that I want to show you. And now, but what I was saying is that once you understand what nothingness really is, the absence of anything at all, then you really understand that only God can create something out of that, because out of absolutely nothing comes. And Krauss is desperately trying to get something out of nothing by redefining nothing, and and the theologians and philosophers are correcting him and saying that that doesn't make any sense, and he's complaining and saying, oh, but if it's your only nothing that works, then he seems to be understanding that if you really work with the real definition of nothing, you understand that only God can create something out of it. And that's exactly the argument, that universe could not uh, pop into existence out of nothing. So God, so since it popped out of existence, since it started to exist, and since God is the only one that can create something out of nothing, then it follows that God exists. Although that sounds like the Kalam cosmological argument, and I'm not really a fan of that argument, and I may do a video on that later.
And I find that sort of content free. Although I guess I think I say in the book that maybe I'm not fit to talk about nothing because theologians and philosophers are experts in that.
Okay, so now that's the silly one-liner. Even if God didn't exist, theologians would still be experts in the following things: the Bible, because theologians study what the Bible teaches, and that if God doesn't exist, that still has a truth value. What does the Bible teach? What did the authors think when they wrote it? The concept of God. Even if God doesn't exist, then you can talk about the concept of God, even if you just do it to understand that it's logically incoherent, but you still can study it. History of religion. Certainly theologians work a lot with this history of the church, and that's certainly knowledge that you can learn about the world, and it doesn't depend on the existence of God. And philosophers are experts in many subjects such as freedom, time, metaphysics, classical logic, modal logic, philosophy of science, etc. So Krauss is making really a very ignorant statement, saying that theologians and philosophers are experts in nothing. And yes, that is wrong there. Now, but what does his book actually say? Does it really have a creation out of literally nothing? Well, no. And this is what Professor David Albert from Columbia, from Columbia says. University. The fact that some arrangements of fields happen. Well, so okay. So in Krauss's book, you have some fields that have an arrangement that corresponds to matter, and others to the existence of particles, and others to no existence of particles. And and that still doesn't explain why the fields exist at all. And this is what Professor David Albert says. The fact that some arrangements of fields happen to correspond to the existence of particles and some don't is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that some of the possible arrangements of my fingers happen to correspond to the existence of a first, and some don't, a fist, and some don't. And the fact that particles can pop in and out of existence over time as those fields rearrange themselves is not a whit more mysterious than the fact that fists can pop in and out of existence over time as my fingers rearrange themselves. And none of these poppings, if you look at them aright, amount to anything even remotely in the neighborhood of a creation from nothing. So that's what Professor Krauss gives you, something that's not even remotely in the neighborhood of a creation from nothing. Of course, in order to understand this well, you need to do some philosophy of science and study it. And maybe, since Professor Krauss believes that philosophers are experts in nothing, he's not going to do that. He's going to stay a bit ignorant about it. But if he's ignorant about it, then like they said in their talk, if you're ignorant about something, you should not be teaching it. And I'm okay that Professor Krauss teaches physics, but I'm not really okay that he teaches philosophy of science, because he doesn't seem to know much about it. Frankly, this is my conclusion of it. I think he's a very intelligent man, but I don't think that he's very coherent in his philosophy of science. Uh, Now they're going to talk about religion, so let's hear it.
which is religion, and science and religion in some sense. Um, when one's, I would suggest that one of the reasons that it's really important to teach kids about science is that they're often that they're brainwashed
Brainwashed.
from a young age with other ideas. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Maybe that the fact that
Yes, I mean, I think that is absolutely true. And when we talked about this astronomer who thinks the world is 6,000 years old, and one knows of many other people who think that, I mean, that is so ludicrous. That's got to be due to childhood indoctrination. There's no other, I think, reason.
I showed you a plausible argument to believe that. I do, although not plausible, a valid argument to believe it, although I don't accept it, and it doesn't need to be about childhood indoctrination at all. Some people become Christians in their adult lives and then start to believe that. Now, he talked about brainwashing people. Again, it's this false dichotomy, science versus religion. Simply because Christians teach their children about God, it doesn't mean that they're brainwashing them. Neither is that incompatible with science. I wonder what Dawkins and Krauss teach their families. I mean, if you believe that something is true, why shouldn't you teach it to your kids? Of course you should. But, of course, they suppose that religion is obviously false, and that's why they're criticizing it. But if I believe that religion, that God exists, why shouldn't I teach it to my kids? Especially if I believe that if they believe in God, they're going to have a much better life, and possibly even an eternal uh, consequence of that, a life in heaven. Why shouldn't I teach them that? I teach them because I love them, and that's exactly why Christians should teach their children of the existence of God. Even if God doesn't exist, I think that Christians are perfectly justified in teaching, as long as they believe that God exists, and it's the natural thing to do, teaching to their kids that God exists, because it would be cruel if you knew that God exists, and if you knew that your children would benefit from that, and you will refrain from teaching it, even if God does not exist. If you believe that He existed, and you believe that it would be beneficial to other people to know that He existed, and you didn't do that, especially to your children, then that would be very, very morally objectionable. And I would like to know. I think he talks about some falsehoods that we know already about. Let me check that.
Explanation. And I think it is a tragic abuse of childhood. I won't say abuse of children because that has other connotations, but abuse of childhood to fill a child's mind, to fill a child's mind with what are now known to be falsehoods.
What are the now known to be falsehoods that Christians teach about their kids? Maybe he's talking about Genesis 1 literal interpretation. Okay, that can be considered to be probably not true, or very probably not the literal interpretation not being the correct one. But is it a known falsehood that is it known that God doesn't exist? I thought that Dawkins and Krauss were open to the evidence of things, and they criticize people for dogmatically asserting things, but it's not really, we don't really know that God doesn't exist. I think we actually kind of know that He does. Uh, but some things, like some miracles in the Old Testament, some things, those things are open to debate whether they happened or not, even inside Christianity. If the accounts are literal, if it's just a story to teach a lesson. But even those things are not known falsehoods, because if God exists, why shouldn't He be able to do a miracle? Like, if He's omnipotent, doing a miracle is triviality. He can obviously do it. The only reason why people are skeptic about miracles is because they really don't believe that God exists, because if He exists, why can't He do a miracle? Um, and I think that's, of course, Dawkins doesn't believe in miracles, doesn't believe in God, so he says it's a known falsehood, but it's not. It's still, the discussion is on. And I think it's actually, in my opinion, I believe it goes to the Christian side. And I'm a Christian, and I obviously believe I'm right, otherwise I would be kind of stupid to believe in something I knew it was wrong. Now let's we continue in next